Gratitude and thank you for everyone for making it to our webinar today. So this would be our third webinar organized by Transcent, and of course it's the first for the year 2021. I'd like to say thank you to Associate Professor Dr. Thuhairah binti Abdul Rahman for being our speaker today. So before I hand over the floor to her, let me give a brief introduction on our speaker. So of course, she doesn't really need much introduction to everyone. She's quite well known to us anyway. Dr. Thuhairah is trained in chemical pathology and is of course currently holding the post as Deputy Dean of Research and Innovation in our Faculty of Medicine, UITM. Her previous, her research interests anchored by metabolic syndrome and atherogenesis, and also her work include research regarding natural products on the processes of atherogenesis, and her other works include investigation of the roles of aquaporins in metabolic diseases, role of apolipoproteins on internalization of dengue viruses, and of course many more, which I will not waste more time to say all of her research work. And she has secured multiple fundings within the institution and also nationally as principal investigator as well as co-investigator for grants such as MOSTI, our FRGS and LRGS from Ministry of Higher Education, and of course internal grants such as Dana Penyelidikan and also GIP, Grant Incentive Penyalia. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Associate Professor Dr. Thuhairah to give her talk on creating a research ecosystem. So the floor is yours, Dr. Thuhairah.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Mufida, for that kind introduction. First and foremost, I'd just like to extend my warmest thanks to the Transcent team for inviting me to give a talk this morning. So they were asking me what sort of topic I want to talk about on this platform, and I just thought it was timely to maybe talk about creating a research ecosystem, which was because I think when I first came into office as a deputy dean, that was one of the first research initiatives in 2020, and we were starting to build a research ecosystem within the faculty. And I thought that maybe what we can do is for me to share my research journey, but in conceptualizing it in the form of research ecosystems that I've been privileged to be part of. So again, my name is Thuhairah. I am a chemical pathologist by training and currently the Deputy Dean of Research and Innovation at the Faculty of Medicine, UITM. But before I really delve into my research journey and sharing it with the audience, I'd just like to highlight this particular slide to kickstart it off. And this is really highlighting in terms of at what stage. This is really looking at the the university's history of research, because sorry. All this while being part of a research community within a university, I've always had this inkling that research actually came when university was started. So the research of the university, the history of the university and the research came at the same time, only to discover much later that it really didn't. That the universities, when it first set up, was really mainly about teaching and learning and disseminating knowledge. And research really came into existence somewhere in the beginning of the 19th century. And it started in Germany at the University of Berlin when it came to form, where this university really decided to make its core the scientific research. And it really came from the academician by the name of Wilhelm von Humboldt. Hopefully I'm doing his name justice by pronouncing it. And he really advocated or really championed the idea of the unity of teaching and research. So pretty much the university came in with the concept of teaching and learning, and later on had the inception of research into the institution. But because I think the evolution of research within a university was so marked, to the point where it has evolved to become the definition of a university, pretty much, where the status of universities now is based on the quality and the productivity of research. And so I think that was the reason why I think for some time I had thought that really research came hand in hand with the university when it first started. And again, being part of a research community at a much earlier time within my career, I've come to understand and I've come to adopt what Creswell in 2002 had mentioned, where research is a process of steps and it's used to collect and analyze information to increase our understanding of the topic or the issue at hand. And it had really spelled out three main steps. And I think this really transcends throughout any research ecosystems, per se. And the first step is really to pose a question. And this is what researchers keep talking about, the research question. So there's always that the question that really ignites the research. And it's because of the curious minds that we are. We're very inquisitive. And so these questions will crop up from time to time. But it's being able to identify whether the question is worth enough exploring to find the answers to, because in our nature, we're always in search of answers to questions. But in the context of research, we now need to know whether or not it's relevant enough to be able to identify the answers to that question. So the first key, again, is really posing that research question. Second is really answering that question. And part and parcel of who we are, being academicians within a university, it is always instinctively that need to be able to disseminate, because we are part of teaching and learning, and that's about dissemination of knowledge. So in this context, it's always about being able to then present the answer to the general, to pretty much the world, through conferences, workshops, and discussions, and publications. So that, in a nutshell, in this particular slide, is just highlighting in terms of the history of research being incorporated into the university, and in the simplest form, what research is defined as, and it's defined as processes. And from there, over the years of my research experience, I've come to realize that through those research processes, I was really within a research ecosystem. And looking into research ecosystem, it really is about a community of researchers that really interacts with one another effectively, that interacts with their environment and other stakeholders. And it's based on a common interest of their respective areas of research. And from there, it stems the knowledge that can be transferred between them, and you get a system level processes emerging. So that really, in a nutshell, is what a research ecosystem is. So bearing that in mind, I'll take you back somewhere in 2002, where I started my medical career in HUKM, which is currently now known as PPUKM. So I was very fortunate to have been placed in a teaching hospital much earlier in my career. So coming into there and coming off from a university, which was already having a research culture, you're coming into a hospital that was also creating a research culture where everybody talks about research over coffees or over breakfast, during lunch, apart from discussing patient care. There was also the inception of research talks within those discussions. So where I started, at the time that I was a houseman, we had heard about these research, people were talking, but we were never part of it. I was not really part of that. But coming to my MO-ship, and when I was placed in Pathology Department under Chemical Pathology Unit, I was invited to play a small role in the FH ecosystem, the familial hypercholesterolemia ecosystem. And this was a very small ecosystem because it existed in chemical pathology with a very small group. But it really starts with the theme of atherogenesis and atherosclerosis. And it had to have the leader, which is usually the principal investigator, and at that time would automatically become a mentor. Because I think through the experience, you know that with research, it's really about mentorship. There's no proper teaching, having a proper class where you get the proper dissemination of knowledge. It's really being part of that and then learning on the job. So when you're within this research ecosystem, you start learning because you're absorbing from your surroundings, the environment, the way the researchers were communicating with one another, how they were strategizing, coming up with the research questions, and deliberating on the research objectives, etc. So with that mentor, that principal investigator really would have to be able to have some form of leadership qualities where they would really have the end point in mind. So they have the destination, and then the team then paves the way towards that destination. So it will again start with the research idea coming from the research question, and at this point in time, it was really looking at novel atherogenic biomarkers. And studying it amongst patients with familial hypercholesterolemia, which were really at higher risk of coronary artery disease. So we were looking at those novel biomarkers amongst the FH, comparing them to normal control subjects, as well as their other related unaffected family members. We were also looking at the effects of statins because we were also part of the lipid clinic at PPUKM at the time. And we were looking at the effects of the statins on those novel biomarkers as well. And so from the research idea, when they were brainstorming it, you come up with a research proposal, submit it to the grant that you think would be interested with that particular research project, and you get the funding. And so the funding started very small, but the funding would allow us to penetrate the research facilities. And at this point in time, our research facility was really the chemical pathology lab because the biomarkers could be analyzed on the automated platforms that were there. So again, this ecosystem was rather close ecosystem. But we had the research facilities, and my role in there was really to take the samples from the patients, run it in our labs, and then being able to do the data analysis. And the data analysis was really guided by the statistician that was there, but mainly from the postgraduates that really had some basic and advanced statistics training. So the postgraduates were also mentoring us in terms of the research because they really had the technical expertise. So this was the FH ecosystem. It was small, but it was sustainable. And from there, these were some of the research outputs that we managed to obtain that we were able to disseminate. There were some that were abstracts in conferences and a full paper for publication. And this really highlights the effectiveness of that particular research ecosystem, because to look at the effectiveness, it is really being able to see that you can generate research outputs from them. And the FH ecosystem has managed to be sustainable up till today, and I think it has grown. And currently, the FH ecosystem is now parked in the university's Center of Excellence, and that's iPerform. And iPerform is closely linked to the Faculty of Medicine, stemming from the Faculty of Medicine. So that's the FH ecosystem. The second ecosystem that I thought I'd want to share with the audience is really in terms of the natural products ecosystem. And this was much after I have pretty much migrated from UTM to UITM after my MO-ship. And then following after we had gone through our Masters of Pathology, I keep mentioning we because it was pretty much myself and a colleague of mine, Dr. Letza, Muhammad Ismail, who's now the head of the Department of Chemical Pathology. So we were back in UITM, and we were invited to participate in the natural products ecosystem. And the natural product ecosystem, again, stemmed from the central theme of atherosclerosis and atherogenesis. It still had its principal investigator or the leader pretty much being able to give us the direction of the research. But this time we had more participation in it because we had gained some experience in the FH study, in the FH ecosystem, and had learned some aspects of research processes there that we were now able to have a bit more confidence to be able to come up with our own research ideas coming off from the natural products, building the research question and the proposals, the methodology, and then we were able to submit to national grants and managed to get the funding. So therefore now, instead of having one PI, we had a few of us were already PI, and it was under that natural products ecosystem. And from here, the problem was when we were doing the FH ecosystem, it was really mainly concentrated within our domain of expertise, which was chemical pathology, because the biomarkers were related to us, and we could really run it on our automated platforms. And the lipid clinic was familiar to us as well. But in this context, we decided to go more fundamental in the sense that we were looking at cell culture and animal study work, which were really out of our domain. And so we needed to bring in the research expertise that could advise us in terms of this. And so in a nutshell, if we're looking at the cell culture, for those that might not be familiar, in a petri dish, as crude as I can describe this, we would introduce cells in a petri dish, and the cells would really mimic the coronary arteries. And then we would then stimulate inflammation to mimic atherosclerosis. And then once we have created that environment, we would then introduce the natural products, either in its crude form, or we would have extracted the bioactive compounds and then introduced it into that system. And then we would then measure the atherogenesis biomarkers in terms of its protein and gene expression to see whether or not the natural products actually attenuated it or it didn't work at all. So that was the research question that we had. And the other component was the animal study, where we would have to identify the animal that could mimic coronary artery disease, much like humans' coronary artery disease, but we would be able to stimulate the coronary artery disease much faster compared to the years that would take in humans. Not that it was ethical either, but we wanted to be able to create atherosclerosis within a matter of weeks and months, and then introduce the natural products to the animals, and then to measure the biomarkers of atherogenesis. So these were, again, outside of our domain, and so we had to bring in the research experts, and really we called in the research experts from the biochemistry department, pharmacology, the statistics were involved, and we needed the anatomic pathologist, the histopathologist involved as well for the animal studies. So again, compared to the FH ecosystem, which was much smaller, this was a bit bigger in terms of the involvement of members. And again, you have the research facilities. This was coming to UITM, which had different facilities than the ones that we had in UTM, and I think it was more advanced in UITM. And this was part under the Institute of Medical Molecular Biotechnology, IMB, as well as our pathology lab, which at the time was called the Center of Pathology and Research Department Laboratory. Research laboratories. So this was, we had that, and then of course we had the postgraduate students, and they all make up this natural products ecosystem. And from that ecosystem, we managed to produce the following research outputs, which was again disseminating the information at conferences, and also being able to publish at index journals. I think at that time this was ranked at Q1 or Q2. And then the final research ecosystem that I thought I'd like to share was the Aborigines ecosystem, because this was one of the biggest ecosystems that I've ever been invited into. And this was really an ecosystems existing within the huge dome of one ecosystem. And the main ecosystem was the Aborigines. That was the main theme. And within that, there exist several ecosystems, but they were not really joined together. So they were just as individual ecosystems. Science, social science came into it as one research ecosystem. We had a few Center of Excellence come into it as their own research ecosystems, looking at nutrition, the metabolomics, and then we came in with our research ecosystem, and that was the Aborigines, and looking again at the common theme of atherogenesis and atherosclerosis. So at this point in time, We didn't really have mentors anymore because at that point in time we were relatively established. So we were actually really being able to work hand in hand with the other principal investigators with the research idea in mind that we want to look at the prevalence of metabolic syndrome, particularly among the Negritos, because we looked at it and thought that they were a very much isolated population from urbanization. And the hypothesis was that MS wouldn't touch them because they lived so remotely. But we found out otherwise. And we also looked at their atherogenic biomarkers, which was not really well studied. And from there, we managed to get the funding. And again, the research experts now grew. We had cardiology, we had pathology, we had the geneticists coming in, we had biochemists coming in as well to contribute within this research ecosystem. And again, the research facilities now was expanded. We, apart from within the faculty at IMMB or at the pathology laboratory, we had now extended some of the research work and some of the analysis at one of the other universities, COE, I promise. So we had run some analysis there as well. And we had the postgraduate students, much like the other ecosystems, that really was the technical support that we had within the ecosystem. But in this context, we managed to bring in industry. And at this point in time, Roche Diagnostics was very interested to pretty much get our feedback in terms of the biomarkers that they run on their platform, and to get our take on whether or not it was very useful in assessing atherogenesis by using their biomarkers. And so they actually also helped in facilitating the funding of the research. So in this research ecosystem now, we have managed to bring in the industry. And that was the learning curve during this particular ecosystem. So that's pretty much the three that I decided to pick out from the various research ecosystems that I was kindly invited to participate and contribute my expertise in it. And this particular Aborigines, we were a bit more ambitious. We wanted to try and get a really high impact publication. So what we did was we really pooled all the data, all the database, and focus on one publication, and then for several conferences. And so we managed to publish in the BMJ Open, and we did a few, which I couldn't find, I'm sorry, but this was the one that I found that in some of the conferences that we actually presented our findings. So what I really wanted to highlight was the context of a research ecosystem and how it is that you can create one. And a lot of the times when I looked at this, there was, I think, the components of the ecosystem that needs to be in place. There were really mainly 5 major components that I thought was necessary. And if it's there, then you can by all means be able to create your own research ecosystem. And the first is that you need human capital. And that would be you belonging to a faculty. And within that faculty, you'd have the researchers and the students and the administrators and the lab technicians that really can help support the research ecosystem that you plan to build. The second component would be the governance capital. And this is really the rules and regulations and norms and the policies, because I think as a researcher, sometimes researchers, because of that research question and the obsession to find the answers to that research question, sometimes might actually throw us off tangent for a short while, that we forget about the ethical components, for example. And the governance capital is really important to just make sure that we're keeping track, so that we know that as much as we try to make our research limitless, that there's always that very thin line that we don't cross in terms of creating a very conducive ethical research culture. The third is the physical capital, and this is really the land, the facilities, the equipment that's really made available to you. So if it's within the faculty and those are made available to you, that's great. If you're able to get them outside of your faculty through your collaborations, that's even better. So your ecosystem would then reach out to other faculties, for example, or other institutions. And so and the other thing is, in terms of looking at the research ecosystem, sometimes when we're coming up with our research ideas, we're thinking we want to do this research experiment. But before you embark on it, it would be really worthwhile to make sure that you would know the access to the facilities that could carry out the experimentations. So that's worthwhile doing some background checks before you want to embark on that particular research endeavor. The fourth is the intellectual capital, and that's, I think, one of the key components, which really is having the minds that would really house the knowledge, the information, and the ideas, and being able to bounce off ideas from one another. And without this intellectual capital, it would not really start off any research projects. So I always presume that the fourth component is really the first component that you would need, and then the rest would really support it. The fifth and the final one is the financial capital, because we all know as researchers that in order to be able to kickstart the research, apart from having the ideas, building the experiment, from strategizing through the ideas, is to be able to have the money to actually fund it. So this is where the exercise of research grants and getting the research fundings is very important. And this is, I think, one of the most laborious and taxing aspect, which is because to get research grants nowadays are more competitive than it was before. I mean, before it was competitive, and imagine now being more competitive than it was. Failure rates to being able to be awarded grants is pretty much a norm, but it's something. It's pretty much something that I think a lot of researchers just need to understand, that just because you submit a proposal does not guarantee that you get it, and that does not mean that your research is not worthy of a grant. It might be that that grant funder, that is not really the scope of what they really want to fund. So you need to find the right grant funders that would be interested to take up your research ideas. And so this 5 components that I feel encompasses the research ecosystem really was coined as the science and technology system by Frischman in 2008. And he really highlighted these 5 components that really makes the research ecosystem sustainable. The other aspect in terms of sustaining the research ecosystem is these 3 aspects. The first is that the system needs to be able to survive, it needs to function, and it needs to update itself over time. So in the simplest form, it needs to actually evolve with time. If a lot of research ecosystems can collapse just because at the time that was something that was the center of research, and so you create that research ecosystem. But if you're not up to date with if you're not up to date with that particular research ecosystem, and you don't really shift it with time, then chances are it will collapse. So one of the keys is that whatever updates there are with time, you would need to ensure that that ecosystem follows through. The next one would be that in that particular system, you'd have a research community that can continue to interact and share and transfer knowledge. So this would mean that initially you would probably set up with the community that you're familiar with, and that you've already established communications and interactions, form networkings, and etc. And then, of course, as senior members, senior members go into retirement and they leave the faculty, you've got the newer generation. They would have to be able to then be incorporated into that research ecosystem very fluidly, so that they can actually come in, be comfortable within the research ecosystem, be comfortable with that environment, and then being able to establish the networkings in order to achieve sustainability of the research ecosystem. And the third and last but not least is that the research ecosystem can really guide upcoming generation of researchers all on its own. So which means that any new researchers coming in would really know the support system that it can obtain from that particular research ecosystem, and be able to immediately come into contributing, and then later on learning to actually spearhead that particular research ecosystem. So I think that's really the key components in order to sustain a research ecosystem. So having spoken this is looking at individual ecosystems, and I'm sure that you can now look at your own research processes and see that as an ecosystem. As the Deputy Dean of Research and Innovation, I needed to really expand this ecosystem that it really can incorporate all 300 plus faculty members that we have here, and for them to be able to relate to the ecosystem that exists in the faculty. So this is, in a nutshell, what the research ecosystem that the deanery has envisioned within the faculty, and this is what it is. And in order to have this research ecosystem, we needed the core researchers that have already been familiar with research practices within the faculty to really give their expertise to develop this particular research ecosystem. And this was one of the endeavors that we had started in 2020. And I think we're still working on it well into 2021. But I'll introduce you to the components, and this really has 7 components within our faculty's research ecosystem, and it really starts with the Biostatistics Consultancy service, and that really gives the faculty members some idea as to where to go to for any advice on biostatistics for their research, either in making their proposals or writing their publication. And so the BCS has kindly come forward to collaborate with the research office, and this is coming from the Public Health and Preventive Medicine department. They were very instrumental in coming up with the service, and they have actually conducted several webinars last year, along with having a lot of the consultation slots to advise, and also conducted some workshops last year, despite COVID having forced us to migrate everything online. And I think this is really thanks to Associate Professor Dr. Zaliha and Dr. Chen, who was really the liaison person with the research office and able to carry out the BCS within the faculty. The second one here is not something that came up in 2020, but really will be coming up in the first quarter of 2021. And this is the Research Ethics Consultancy. As you are well aware, the ethics unit, I think, has now able to separate and become its own independent department within the faculty. And so the ethics department now has come forward with their initiative to come up with the research ethics consultancy, where now faculty members can actually go to them for advice in terms of their research proposals and publication, as a way to ensure that we carry out the research ethically. And they would have the same template as the Biostatistics Consultancy service. I think they've, because of that good communication, we're standardizing across the board, where they will be conducting a few webinars throughout the year and have consultation slots as well coming up. So be on the lookout for the Research Ethics Consultancy that will be coming up in the first quarter of this year. Then we have Transcent, who is kindly done, I think, well beyond when I came into office. They were doing this endeavor, and we just decided to put them in the limelight in 2020 and brought them in. And their main role really is to connect the fundamental researchers with the clinical researchers and being able to bridge that gap, so that within the faculty we have a very strong collaboration. So they've been successful in a number of their endeavors when the researchers have approached them, and they've assisted with proposal preparations. And I think some have successfully secured grants through the Transcent's help. And of course, Transcent will continue having their webinars, and I think they've already come up with their newsletters as well sometime last year, and that's really a good initiative on their part. With the Faculty Research Committee, this has been in existence ever since I think the faculty has embarked in research, and the FRC really is there. The FRC is really there to assist in terms of to assist in Sorry, I'm just doing my thoughts. Okay, to assist
Apa mama
with
tak
the
kasih
proposal.
tengok gambar?
Sorry. um, um,
Sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. But what we do is really we try our best to give constructive criticisms, and they're there so that we can improve the proposals within the faculty members, so that you're able to successfully get grants, or you are able to successfully acquire the ethics approval that's needed to ensure that your projects take off. So that's really the role of the FRC, is to facilitate mainly. We have the Innovation Committee, and they're there really because we have moved towards, the university really wants us to innovate now, where fundamental research can be translated to prototypes, and then later on see whether or not we can help with the marketing of the prototypes or commercialization, patents, copyrights, and that's really through the Innovation Committee. And they're there to really advocate innovation, and they would really be the ones to create awareness in terms of innovation. And I think on the clinical side, where the clinicians are really, really heavily into innovation, they're really good at it. And so the Innovation Committee really helps them link with either BigCom within the university to help with either the patents or their copyrights. And then we have the research facilities. We have 5 under the research office. The 5 facilities here was, of course, the IMMB that houses all the cell culture and other fundamental research work. We have the laboratory animal care unit, also within one building. They're on the 3rd floor. I hope I'm right. Yep, 3rd floor. And they're really housing all the animal studies. So we've got that all under the faculty's roof. We've also got Neuron that really does a lot of the neuroscience experiments. And this was really initiated, and it really stemmed from our previous dean, Professor Nafiza, and I think with her team. And currently it's doing really well in terms of neuroscience research. We have the Pathology Department, and this is currently headed by Dr. Aletza. And they're also involved in facilitating research through either the hematology, chemical pathology, or anatomic pathology aspects. I forgot medical microbiology also. I think they do support some of the research. It's just that they're not under the research office per se. But they're there as well if there's any microbiology research work to be done. And then last but not least, the center. The center is a center for translational and epidemiology research, and really houses the clinical trials that are part in the Faculty of Medicine and now with the HPU, HUITM. It can also house any of the human research that needs some assistance with the science officers at the center. So the final one is really the research interest groups that's really part at our Renew at the university level, but is pretty much coming from the Faculty of Medicine faculty members. So we have 10. Majority are coming from, majority are mainly focused on the fundamental research. There's also on the clinical aspect, which is the rehab medicine, as well as women and wellness. So the research interest group is much like Transcent, where if you have similar research interests as they are, you would be worthwhile to check our Faculty of Medicine website and check out their website and look at the members and see whether or not you can link with them and come up with some research endeavors and create future research ecosystems with them. So they're also there to actually assist. So this is really what the map of our research ecosystem within the faculty looks like. And I think in the last few slides, I just wanted to highlight in terms of the ecosystem. If you recall beforehand, there was that research ecosystem of the Aborigines where it was a huge ecosystem and there were ecosystems within that ecosystem, but they were not linked with one another. And so the future endeavor for our group was to try and do an ecosystem link. And so this was actually the dengue project, and that was mainly because I had read an article on PLOS ONE by Lee et al., and he had highlighted that apolipoproteins, which is a biomarker of atherogenesis that I'm associated with, that might be some form of significant association with the apolipoproteins to dengue infectivity. And I was quite captivated with that particular research and wanted to know more because it was not well explored. And so we decided to explore this in dengue. But of course, that's not within my domain of expertise. So I had to invite members from the medical microbiology department to join us in this particular research endeavor. And so this is where we are in this research ecosystem of atherogenesis, atherosclerosis, and the biomarkers. And this is the dengue infectivity research ecosystem. And that's really anchored by Associate Professor Dr. Wong Suk Moy, as well as Associate Professor Dr. Fazila. And so with the two of them and my team coming in, we have pretty much linked this ecosystem. And this is pretty much the way forward that we're doing the current research that we're actually working on. A bit challenging because it's something relatively new to us, but it's progressing in terms of looking to see whether we're going to be able to answer the research question that we had posed initially. So this is again coming to the idea that having a research ecosystem is great, but being able to link ecosystem is even better because then you're making yourself much stronger. And I think currently with the concept of globalization, we're also trying to globalize within the university. So we're cross-linking and having a lot of collaborations with other faculties and even other institutions reaching out to even outside the university. And it's really nice to be able to break down those borders and being able to have that kind of collaborative network. This is the second to last slide. This is the Naylor report, which I thought was nicely done by, which was a nice statement by Professor David Naylor, the professor of medicine at the University of Toronto. And this was them trying to redefine, re-strategize the research ecosystems in Canada. And he had stated that the healthy, sustainable research ecosystem really depends on the ample opportunities for the new researchers coming into the institution to break into the system, to be able to acclimatize within the research ecosystem and then establish themselves, being able to avoid the gaps as they transition to mid-career, and then provides a strong support for researchers during the peak years of their research output and the impact. It also is able to make fair and balanced appraisals of proposals by senior researchers without overweighting their history or undervaluing their potential for further contributions regardless to age. So it really highlights that we shouldn't be ageism when it comes to creating this research ecosystem, that as much as a young a member of the faculty comes in, they're just as important as the older members that have been there for a while because they've had the research experience, and for them to marry and be able to merge and work as one entity in order to be able to create a research ecosystem and make it sustainable. So I thought that was quite nicely put. And the final slide is just the take-home messages. To start the research ecosystem, you need to start establishing links. So you need to start your communication, and that communication can really come out through unexpected aspects. Definitely through conferences, through discussions with other members from other countries, through workshops, interdepartment activities, the common colleague that you may have, and then you decide that you want to work with them, and then you come up with a research idea just because from just having the colleague and being able to mesh well with them, and then wanting to bring them into the team. The research office, we can also help in terms of linking you with any other interest groups that you might share a similar interest with. Also through publications, so you might have read journals, and then you were looking at a particular publication that really interested you. You can also get in touch with their corresponding author, and then strike the networking there, as well as do online research. I know this one is Dr. Hugh's expertise, because if he needs someone, he'll just go on the online search, and somehow he manages to connect with them. So that's one aspect that you can do. And sometimes it could be unexpectedly the person next to you, sitting next to you in any events that you strike a conversation with, and you might actually share some form of interest that can actually create a research ecosystem. So I think that's in a nutshell of how what I wanted to present today in terms of understanding what a research ecosystem is, how you can create one, what are the components to be able to create, and introducing to you the research ecosystem that exists in the faculty and will try to be sustainable within the faculty. And with that, I thank you, and I hope you are able to take away some aspects of the research ecosystem within your research endeavors, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thuhairah. So I would open the next 15 minutes for questions. You can put it in the chat box, or if you would like to ask questions verbally, you can unmute yourself and please ask your way through. Which I gather a lot from what you have mentioned before, and I can relate a few of them to myself as well. You really need to have a mentor, and from that mentor, you sort of build up sort of more like so you have a top, and then you have to have a collaterally, so literally it's like horizontal, and then you have to have a vertical as well. So you have to have sort of a junior ones for you to to coach, because of course when you're mentoring, you yourself would have to mentor someone else as well,
Yeah.
and it has to be within that sort of similar interest. That's the
Yeah.
other thing. Any question from the members or any from the audience?
I think the other thing I want to highlight is that this is really the concept of paying it forward, because you
Yeah.
would have had a mentor, and then you would have learned from them, and then you would have taken the initiative to actually mentor someone else, and it should actually create a chain effect. So that's really what we
What I
try to
would like to
communicate.
ask, maybe I can ask one question. Let's say we always talk about mentor, and we always look up and say that that is a good mentor. What if we
Mhm.
have a bad mentor?
I've always thought that as bad a mentor as someone is, there could be some good aspects that you might want to take away from that particular mentor. Again, how a bad mentor or a good mentor is defined can really be because they're not on the same wavelength as you are.
Sure. Yeah.
And if let's say, and it's really vital to be able to identify the right mentor. But I think this is really in terms of us being mentors later on, is never to really force it onto someone. Your research ecosystem, but more of inviting them in and then seeing if they like it, and if they don't, then maybe finish up that project and then they can move on, and explore other research ecosystems. But I suppose if let's say you have someone that you have mentored and has maintained, because at some point that the mentee, for example, would definitely have to branch out and form their own research ecosystems. So I think in terms of bad mentor, good mentor, I think in the first few months you would have gauged whether they will be
True.
good, whether you'd have the same wavelength, and you really have to be able to have um, um, a very good relationship with your mentor. You're absolutely right.
Okay, but maybe the other good thing about having a sort of bad mentor is for you to teach yourself that you're not going to become like them
Yes,
lah. So basically,
yes,
it's always a good, if you look at
yeah,
it positively, that would be
yes,
good lah.
yes. I think, yeah, because you develop your own
Yeah,
principles.
yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Other question, and nothing coming up from the chat box. That's the other thing that I wanted to ask. It was about the getting our collaboration from the industry. How do you eventually did that? And what are the ways for other researchers to try and incorporate or get industry to work along with us?
Okay, that one I think would really be Dr. Hill's expertise,
Yeah,
because he'll
it,
just
it's
bulldoze his
part of his
way.
as well.
Yeah, because I think what I've learned from that, from his sharing of his experiences with me, was that if you're interested with that industry, you really much email them or get in touch with them, and then being able to sell your idea, your concept of that research ecosystem. And it's really the ability of you being able to let them know that they have a place in your research ecosystem. And I think that was what we did with Roche Diagnostics, where we came in, just asked them, are you interested? We're doing this. So, because we were always purchasing reagents from them through our research, from our research grants. But we had never broached the question of, are you ever interested in
Yeah.
research? And that was pretty much it. It was just a question that, is Roche ever interested to be part of? And they said, oh yes, we do have a research department. They have an
Oh,
R&D, and they allocate a certain budget to ensure that they support research within the research community. And that was how we got to know. So sometimes it's just really asking.
asking.
Yeah,
If you
it's
don't
just
ask,
really
you won't
asking.
know.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Any other question? I don't think they have maybe too much for them to absorb.
Oh, I
Assalamualaikum,
hope not.
Epi Dr. Thuhairah. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just wonder, I mean, like some of us do have our own research ecosystem and it's very small. And then
Mhm.
we also try to establish collaboration between another ecosystem. So my question is one, either as mentor or mentee, how can we balance between our involvement with our own ecosystem and also our collaboration with other ecosystem? Because as you know, sometimes when we want to collaborate with another ecosystem, we are very like the area is not really is something new because we try to create a bridge between the two ecosystem. So how can you actually advise us in terms of balancing our involvement? Because as you know, we might involve and then we forget our ecosystem, then our ecosystem just becoming just gone, something like that. If you can advise us, thanks.
I think also, let me read the question. So, which means that you're trying to see whether you can balance when you start to link the ecosystems, seeing in terms of your contribution, whether you'd be confident enough to contribute in the other research ecosystem. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that really depends. Again, like for example, for me, our first proper linkage of ecosystem was the dengue apolipoprotein project. And that was a daunting experience because we do have some basics when we did empath program with medical microbiology and dengue. We have some basic knowledge, but we don't have the in-depth knowledge that the medical microbiologist has. And so when Associate Professor Dr. Wang Siu Moy came in, and then she had thrown in all sorts of jargon to us. That was it was a very daunting experience because she was explaining methodologies that we're not familiar with. But the good thing about the researchers on the dengue ecosystem was that they were able to break it down in the most simplistic form in terms of their experimentation to make us understand the concept of why they had to do certain phases of the experiments. And I think that's one of the key components. So Professor Dr. Rosaiza is really having that really clear communication, and being aware that perhaps bringing in someone from another research ecosystem into yours, and for us to go into theirs, that we're on unfamiliar territory, and as the leader of that particular research ecosystem, they need to empathize and need to understand. And I think on our part, how it was empathized is because we sort of raised our hand and said, look, we really don't understand. Please explain us. Please explain to us. And it took a few versions before they could finally get us to understand, and we were on the same wavelength. So again, it's really about the communication. Sometimes the researchers might be so excited about the research, forgetting that we might not be really in the research, within that research expertise, and they forget to explain it at our level. That's one, and it's on our part to highlight. The other thing is, because you, in terms of coming to the other research ecosystem, you really need to know where it is that you would significantly contribute. So I think coming back, because I was familiar with FH, that was very comfortable for me because that was really chemical pathology and it was clinical, which I was more geared to. But when we did cell culture and animal study, that was completely new, and we really needed a lot of help. And at that time, Associate Professor Dr. Thuhairah was there, and she had some experience, and we really learned from her in that sense. So number one, whether you're daring enough to take the challenge, and then in taking the challenge, you're going to know that it's never going to be easy, but it's a learning curve. But as long as you have the relevant expertise there, you should be safe to explore that particular environment. So I always think that it's a challenge. And if you think that that if a problem keeps coming at you and it's being posed, the main way to address it is to be able to just look at the problem one at a time and find the solution to the problem one at a time, and then put it aside because you've solved it. So that's really the way that I think you can move forward in terms of having that research collaboration. Persistence.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is that okay, Dr. Rosfaiza? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think when you have a lot of problems, let's say if you're done with, maybe 100 types of problems, you go through one by one first, and then look at the ones that is sort of least needing your time to work on, and then put that aside, and then you work on the more major problems, and that sort of should get you going lah. So rather than focus on the big one first and then forget about the small problems that you can actually deal on as soon as possible. I find that
right.
for example, if we get reviews from articles, for example, so you send articles and you get all this, lots and lots of reviews, and you start working on the ones that you can work on first. Easy,
Absolutely.
as simple as changing the grammar, for example, or from one word to another, and then you work on to the bigger issues. Thank you, Dr. Rosfaiza, for the question, and Dr. Thuhairah for the answers. I don't think we have any more question from the audience.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Hello.
Dr. Thuhairah, Prof. Thuhairah. I just wondered, what would your advice be on how to start this research ecosystem in the department? What is the best way to do it?
The best way to do it is to find a common theme first. What would be the research interest, for example? To be able to see, probably as well, looking at within the faculty as well, what sort of research is going on in the event that you want to actually invite other members within the faculty or even outside of the faculty. So it will always start with one common research theme. That's usually, and from that theme you can find the research question, what sort of question that you want to be answered, and then from there you can come up with the aims or the objectives, and when you create this research ecosystem, depending on how big or how small you want to start it with, if let's say you're not comfortable, you can start off with a small group, and that small group really will be the focus group within that ecosystem, and you can start with applying for grants for that particular research. But again, the ecosystem cannot exist without the common theme or because that's the foundation of that research ecosystem. So it's a common theme in terms of from my perspective, on my part, it was the atherogenesis. So the atherogenesis really was always common throughout any research system that I came into.
Right. I think it's quite a challenge in the era of subspecialty, because you will not have that many people in your department, for example, who share the same subspecialty with you. I mean, usually you want to do research in area of your subspecialty instead of going into, for me, I'm radiology, yeah? So you don't really do research in radiology as general, so you'll go into your subspecialty. And there'll probably be one or two subspecialists with similar interest to you in the department, but not that many lah. So I think department-wise, if you want everybody to be involved in some sort of research ecosystem, it's quite challenging to do unless the team will be, it's bigger. For example, it's a radiology instead of breast radiology, you know, that sort of thing. So
yeah. So I think for example, in your respect, because you've just highlighted that different members have got different subspecialties, they might want to start off their research ecosystem within the department. So which means that your department may start off with small research ecosystems, but it might not be all of your departmental members being one. That would probably mean that if you start it off and then you probably say, oh, I need cardiology in your subspecialty, for example, you invite the cardiologist in. Or if you need members within endocrine, you bring endocrine in. So, and that would create your research ecosystem. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the department, but at least within the department, you would have been able to advise in terms of how you want to create your research ecosystem based off a theme. And sometimes I think it's just a lot of reading the journals and seeing whether or not some of those subspecialties can actually come together, because I'm not familiar with the radiology research. So it'd be worthwhile to really have a read and see how it is that those publications, what are the publications currently talking, I mean, in terms of addressing the current issues within the radiology ecosystem of that particular research. So I think that's as much as I can advise you. But like I said, if that's the problem, having the subspecialty, then maybe you can start it off and then have your links with the other departments or other units, and then create that ecosystem, and then see, and then eventually some of the other subspecialties, I'm sure there's a common ground at some point, and that they can come in to contribute, maybe not in their subspecialty, but really in the radiology aspect in general.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question before we end? We actually enough time already. It's 10:16. I'm pretty sure a lot of us might have other meetings to go to. Of course, Thuhairah as well.
Yeah.
Any other question before maybe last question before we end? I don't think so. That's a signal, I think. Nobody else. So thank you very much, Dr. Thuhairah, for, I think it's a very good thing to emphasis for us. It's something that we should start. It's something that we should start on rather than put it alongside and not really wanting to do anything with it. So it should start from you or yourself. So once you start, I'm pretty sure there will be others who would like, when they see what we are doing, they usually comes and say that they are interested and so on. So basically it's starting. So maybe a few last words from the Thuhairah then.
I think the only last word is, number one, research. It was never easy to start. It will never be easy to start off research. Getting the grants, publishing, there's always going to be the hurdles. But you have to understand that those hurdles are not there to say, let's just throw in the towel and move on. They're really there to say, well, let's find our way around it and then figure out how to solve it. So if you want to make sure that your research continues, you just have to be resilient, much like how we were doing Houseman's and MO-ship. We had to build our resilience to go through the difficulties at that time, having put our human bodies through the kind of on-calls that we had to go through, etc. This is a similar concept in terms of research. If there is a failure, you go back to the drawing board, you redesign, and then you continue. So I think that's really the take-home message, and the research ecosystem there is there to actually support as much as possible.
Okay, with that, I would like to thank you, everyone. Please take note in the future for our next series 4 of our webinar, which will be coming soon. So thank you very much, Dr. Thuhairah, for sharing today. It's a very inspiring talk, and I think everyone really got to know what is the research ecosystem in the faculty itself. So we will know where to go to, hopefully, and where to start to build our own research ecosystem. So with that, I would like to thank you, everyone, and please remember to fill in your attendance, which we have put in the chat room. And again, thank you very much. We will see you soon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam and a very good morning. Thank you so much.